Hello everyone, today is Thursday, October 29th. As always, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Nguyen. Today, beverage of choice, just water, just keeping it simple. Today we're going to try something a little bit different. Due to the nature of this question, this is something I've been asked a few times before. And I think this is something that is a little bit in depth, so it's something that is worth discussing. I know there's some interest in it. And it basically kind of boils down to, when do I make the transition? When do I go from being a casual hobbyist and just, occasionally doing some buying and selling online to becoming a full-time business and doing this as a profession? I know a lot of people are on the cusp. A lot of people are kind of into this at varying levels. There are a lot of people that are kind of happy with where they're at, but at the end of the day, I think there is a fair amount of interest in people who, again, are looking at taking the next step. Maybe it's not necessarily something that they want to do full time, but there are a lot of benefits to doing it as a business. One, you can start writing off your purchases, right? There's a lot of reasons tax wise to register as a business, to make sure it's all done above board and properly. And of course, if you ever are going to look at becoming a brick and mortar store down the line, expand beyond an online operation, which is what most people have, right? These are all things to consider. So with that, we'll kind of hop in today. We'll kind of start with the very basics. In future episodes, we'll kind of look at some more advanced topics that would be more applicable to people who are looking at maybe being a little bit more entrenched, that already kind of have the ball rolling, and then maybe they're looking at things about trying to find office space, maybe looking at getting a brick and mortar, getting employees. But today, we'll just start with the very, very basics, and we'll kind of go from there. So with that, for most people, you should be able to identify where you are, right? Most people, if all you do is just sell casually online, you use Facebook groups, social media platforms, what have you, to do your buying and selling, that probably puts you in a more casual hobbyist type space, which is perfectly fine. Most people do fall in this space. There is a point when you have to be aware that when you are starting to put time, when you're starting to put money into this, and if you're profiting from this, then you need to consider seriously taking the next step and going on to being a business. This isn't something that people talk about all the time, but any profit you make from selling cards, from selling anything as a matter, is technically taxable income. I know this isn't something that is super popular among most people. Most people don't like the idea that they're going to be taxed on their cards that they sell, but reality strikes. If you're a business and any profit you make, you pay taxes on. Selling cards is not really different. In theory, if you're selling if you're selling anything at even a garage sale, that's technically taxable income without a way to definitively prove that you have taken a loss or that you have purchased an item at some point in the past and you're just selling the item for less than what you paid for. Technically, a garage sale is taxable income. Obviously, most people don't do this, but this is something to consider. If you are ever at the point where you're making a substantial amount of money, I certainly wouldn't want to risk an audit. When you start having large amounts of money go through your PayPal transaction and it's not being reported, you risk the possibility of being audited by the IRS. That generates a huge amount of headache in itself. So it is, for the most part, in the long run, it will benefit you to do everything above board. Even if you're doing it on a very, very basic level and you don't plan on making this your full-time profession, at the very least, you should still register as a business. It allows you to have tax deductions based on product that you're acquiring, and then it allows you to write things off, such as postage, shipping supplies, office supplies, etc., off when you're selling cards. So that way, those costs don't come out of your own pocket. So with that, when do you make a transition to a business? And this is something that is ultimately not something I can answer for you. This is rather my observations, seeing other people try and make this shift. A lot of people do kind of teeter on the edge, right? They aren't sure if they want to do a business yet. If they aren't sure if they have the means to do a business yet. They don't necessarily have the know-how. They don't know fully the ins and outs and the proper workings of what being a business is. So a lot of people are on the edge. There's a bit more to becoming a business than just being someone who is passionate about the hobby industry, passionate about games that they play, and with a thick binder of cards. And for that very reason, that is why I see a lot of businesses fail. This is something that we have discussed in the past before. This is not an easy industry to get into. This is not something that is going to make you rich in the long run. A lot of people who do this because they like working for themselves. They like the idea of being a small business owner. They're passionate about what they do, which can only get them so far. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that paying your bills, being able to pay yourself, is something that you have to prioritize. And for a lot of people, to be perfectly frank, I see a lot of people who do this who think that they're coming out ahead, and most of these people may get better equity on their time by just working a job and using it to pay for the hobby up front, rather than thinking that they have the know-how and the hustle to really try and get ahead, especially when there are so many people in this industry who are already firmly established and they have far more capital and far more resources than your average person. So with that, I think the biggest traps that people fall into, which we'll kind of break down here, is when you get started, you need to have a sufficient amount of working capital. And what is working capital? The definition of working capital fundamentally is nothing more than your assets minus your liabilities. So when we talk about assets, we're talking about cash on hand, right? This is liquid cash. This is something that you can easily spend, right? You can go out, pay your debtors, any accounts payable, any amount that you need to owe to someone, right? Liquid assets you can pay. Other assets, right? This is simply your inventory. These are things, your cards, your trade binders, the value of your collection. All these are assets. And then liabilities are outstanding debts. Maybe you owe your distributor money. Maybe you owe rent, right? These are all things that you have to calculate into your liabilities. Anything that you owe outwards to anyone else, those are liabilities. Working capital is assets minus liabilities. Most people don't start generally with liabilities. You're not really on the hook for anything, but once you get your business rolling, you can start to see where you start incurring costs, where money starts to go out the door. You're starting to buy collections. You have to pay for supplies, pay for postage, pay employees if you have it. If you have a working space that you use, you have to pay rent. You have to pay yourself. You have to pay your employees, right? The list goes on. But when you're starting out, most people don't really have liabilities, so they work just off their assets. And one thing to remember is that you have liquid assets and illiquid assets. So in the past, we've talked about realizing profits. This is kind of in the same vein. Your inventory that sits there until you sell it is nothing more than a piece of cardboard that you've assigned some value to. Until you can actually convert that into a liquid asset, until you can actually convert that into money, until it's been sold, all you're doing is sitting on assets. And you have to remember, at the end of the day, your assets don't pay bills. You can't tell your employee that, hey, I'm a little short on sales this week. I'm going to give you some of my inventory to cover your paycheck. That's not how this works, right? Like, this is one of those things that people seem to confuse. If you're operating by yourself, if you're not operating as a business yet, this is something that's fine. But when you have costs, when you have things to pay, having liquid capital, this is something that's very important, and you always need to be able to keep a balance on hand. If you have too much liquid capital, if you have too much cash on hand, right, it's likely that you sold off a lot of stuff. You're not having enough things to sell. If you have too many assets that you're sitting on and they're not selling, you're going to be short on cash when it comes time to pay out your distributors, pay out your employees, pay yourself, etc. So being able to understand the liquidity of your assets is something that is very, very important. When you're trading with someone, right, for most people who are traders, they like to do trading online. Via that way, they turn their cards into other cards. You don't really have to think about that, but the moment you try and sell your cards or sell your assets for cash, for money, it becomes a whole different ballgame. Then you have to start considering how easy is it to sell things. We all know that your standard rares and mythics are playable, going to move much faster than your old school cards that have a much lower scope of demand. There's less people wanting them. They may move much slower. Having a good, healthy amount of working capital is going to be essential, absolutely essential before you get started. And I think one of the most dangerous things that people fall into is they rush this. When they start a business, they simply do not have enough to get going. They don't realize how much a startup costs, all your operating costs that you have to incur all at once at the beginning is something that is a relatively high barrier. And most businesses will fail relatively early on. They'll fail off the bat because they didn't give themselves the means to get over this barrier. So understanding your cash flow, being able to have this working capital is probably the first and most essential step when you're making that transition from hobbyist into a business that most people don't overcome. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is why I see most people fail. They had a certain amount of working capital to get in, and then before they had the means to really get going, they didn't realize that doing what they wanted was going to have all these additional costs that come in. It's going to cost them more money than what they expected. And by the time that they actually got off the ground, there isn't that much working capital left. And then they start getting desperate, and then things start to spiral out of control, and it gets much worse for them in a relatively short period of time. This is the most common reason why you see stores fail in the beginning. A lot of stores will close very early on simply because they did not have enough working capital and enough cash flow to get them off the ground and be able to maintain them early on. This isn't something that is unique to card stores. This is a phenomenon that's relatively consistent to most retail operations, to most small businesses. Most small businesses do expect to operate in the red for, I think the number, kind of the general consensus number is 12 to 18 months, depending on what industry you're in. And this is not necessarily nature of when a business is in the red, right? We say business is losing money. It doesn't necessarily mean the business is losing money. It simply means that the cost that the business is incurring is going to be more than whatever profits the business is taking in. And again, this is not to say that the business is necessarily losing money. This is simply to say that in the first year or the first 18 months, the business is incurring more costs that are associated with a startup. When we think about on a very basic level, if you're opening up a restaurant from scratch, what do you have to do? You have to go out and rent a space. You have to find a space. You have to get fixtures. You have to get tables. You have to get your kitchen ready. You have to have all the plates, silverware, dishes, whatever you use inside the kitchen. All these things are going to be costs that you incur before you ever even consider opening your restaurant to the public, right? You have to have your staff trained, you have to have staff hired, you have to have your chefs ready to be able to make the dishes, you have to get all the food that's you're going to use to start cooking before you can even open up the door and sell your first dish. Right? That's a very basic way of looking at this. This is something that is a very simplified overview, but retail operations, card stores, local game stores, even an online store, not really any different. So a lot of the startup costs that I'm talking about, like what are the startup costs I'm talking about? So to begin, if you're going to transition to business, you need to register as a business in your state, register as an LLC, what have you. This is a relatively small cost, but it is something that you need to do with the state before you can really get going. This allows you to get a tax ID number. You need to register for an EIN with the IRS, employee identification number. These are all things that have to be done before you can officially become a business. And excuse me. So this is just one example of a cost. So the first thing most people should do, and this is something I mentioned in a past episode, is register, find out what it costs in your state, register with an LLC, and this is how you get the ball rolling. If you ever want to set up an account with a distributor, with anyone to purchase sealed product from, they're going to ask for your tax ID. They're going to ask, most places will ask for a physical address. They want to know that you're a brick and mortar store. Most distributors won't sell directly to online only retailers. They want to see that you have, the distributors will want to see that you have a brick and mortar store, that you're a legitimate business, before they'll even open their doors to start selling product to you. If you want to set up a business bank account, same thing. You need to have these documents ready. They'll ask for your tax ID, etc., before they'll open up a business account with you for your bank. For me, one of the first things I did was I got a separate cell phone line. I registered with Verizon when I did, and I said that, hey, I need a business line. I need to have a iPad that I can use as a mobile payment processor, and a mobile hotspot so I can get data whenever I'm on the road. I don't have to rely on convention center Wi-Fi, etc. I went out, got these things done towards the very, very beginning. They asked similarly for tax ID, for your documents to indicate that you're a registered business, etc. These things are things that they want right away. And this is just the first step. So once you have that done, you can start going out and, again, figuring out what you need for your business. What do you need to get going off the ground? And these, again, are costs that are associated with your startup. Before you even get anything going, these are things that you want to have in place, you want to have ready, so you don't have to deal with it down the line, because trying to get ahead of the problem is going to save you time, and ultimately it's going to save you money. And this isn't something that most people do well enough. They simply aren't prepared to take on these various things, and down the line, when they go back and try and fix a problem, it causes them more headache than if they had just done it right the first time. And this is something that is a recurring theme in business. This is something that I don't think enough store owners realize when they're trying to solve problems. A lot of the times they would have benefited greatly if they had gone ahead of the problem and realized the problem in advance, and instead of trying to put it down the line and solve it as they go. So to tack on some of the additional startup costs that we have, the first things I would recommend that people do is, because most people aren't going to transition right away into a brick and mortar store, most people do start out as an online business first. The things that I would recommend, after you have an LLC set up and you have all this going, is to start to set up your online accounts. So if you want to be selling through TCG Player, set up a TCG Player seller account, set up that way. If you're going to sell through eBay, set up your eBay account, get all the things going to be able to properly have your store online and ready to sell. And before we can even start considering selling, we have to remember we need supplies, we need shipping items, we need all these various things. These were things that personally I tried to think very, very hard. Luckily, I had the experience of working in a store. I had kind of the know-how. I had some background knowledge going in. So I knew that before I wanted to get started, what do I need? To make sure that I could have a printer, a laser printer that was efficient, that was very, very low on ink, and it was something that was reliable, wouldn't break down, and it could easily connect to either if I use a desktop, if I use a laptop, right? These are all things that are very, very simple that I want to make as painless as possible. So I did some research, found the proper office printer that could handle a lot of pages before it went out. I had a large reserve to be able to hold a lot of paper, so I don't need to be changing paper constantly and adding more paper, and it was efficient on ink. These are costs that do add up, whether or not you think about it. Having an efficient printer, having something that doesn't use a lot of ink, that isn't wasteful, is something that will save you money in the long run. And then when you're buying this, you need to consider, am I buying supplies in bulk? Printer paper, it goes down the more you buy. When you're looking at other things as well, one of the first things I did was I went out and got envelopes made rather than use a stamp, because A lot of people I know, they just have a custom rubber stamp that they use, and they just stamp all their envelopes with their return address. That's not something I do. I don't want to sit there and just stamp and use a stamp. One, it's tedious. Two, it's time consuming. Three, I think the ink actually is something that I don't have the cost mapped out for sure. I don't know how long an ink pad lasts, but I would just rather pay the slight premium and have my address and my company name printed envelope cleanly and not have to worry about it. I got windowed envelopes. I should have gone self seal. I got ones, so I actually had to buy these envelope moisteners. This is something I'm going to fix in the next batch once I go through all these envelopes. The idea is that you want to make things as easy and straightforward as yourself as possible. As I mentioned in yesterday's episode, I'm happy to pay the premium to have this done for me. I don't want to pay someone to sit there where their job is to stamp a bunch of envelopes. I pay the premium. I got it done. Whenever I need an envelope, I just grab a stack, put them in, use the envelope moistener, seal it, and then I'm good to go. These are things that, as a business, you should know that the more you buy, the more you're going to save. My first batch, I bought 5,000 envelopes at a time. I'm pretty much all the way through it now. It's likely the next batch I'll probably purchase a little bit more to get another price discount break. You have to consider how much you're going to be selling, how quickly it'll take you to sell through and use all the envelopes, and you can figure out that way. But again, the more you buy, the bigger discount you'll get, but that is going to be another cost that you're going to incur towards the beginning. In addition to shipping supplies, you also need to have penny sleeves. Usually these are things that you want to stock on hand. Penny sleeves, top loaders. We know top loaders are in relatively short supply right now. It's hard to get top loaders in mass. So it is likely that if you're going to get top loaders right now, you'll probably be paying a premium for them. Or you're going to have to be waiting well in advance. I know some people have swapped and tried to use card savers or trying to sandwich them between the cardboard top loaders, I call them, just a folded piece of cardboard that's perforated, similar to the things that they use inside the vending machines that have cards, the kind of grab bag vending machine type things. So that's one way that people can choose to save money. That's not something I care to do. I would just rather pay for top loaders and have kind of the peace of mind that when I ship cards out, they're going to be relatively safe and no damage is going to come to them. These are just examples of shipping supplies and office supplies you need to get off the ground. We haven't sold our first card yet. We are in the process of getting to that stage. So we already have the cost incurred of setting up your LLC and buying office supplies. Beyond that, what else? You need to figure out the people you need to have contact with early on. If you're going to need a lawyer in case you get sued, in case you want to litigate against someone, have a lawyer handy, have someone who specializes in business law, have someone that is able to, that at the very least, if you have something, you know who to call. And sometimes this is simply a matter of driving around in your area, just driving and going into various strip malls, kind of seeing where I can find a closest attorney in the event that there's something where I need a lawyer and I know who to call, as opposed to, okay, now I have a lawyer, all of a sudden where do I go? Or all of a sudden I need a lawyer, where do I go, where do I look? Have this handy, at least have their contact information, have a business card or something in the event that you need to call them, you need to reach out to them. You have that handy, you can email them, get a hold of them right away. Another person you want to have handy, an accountant. Someone who will handle your taxes. Once you get past the point of doing taxes yourself, once you're no longer just filing your personal taxes, getting an accountant is generally advisable. They have the know-how, they have the means, they have the knowledge, they're able to answer your tax questions. When it comes to remitting sales tax, when it comes to resolving your taxes at the end of the year or at the end of quarter per business, these are all things that it requires a lot of mental strain to do so. Is it possible to do yourself? Absolutely. There are definitely people I know who file their own taxes for a business. They just have the know-how, they just have the means, and that's something that they just kind of want to do. There are ways to do this. TurboTax, H&R. These are all places they do have software. They do have means that will kind of help you walk through it and do it yourself. But as we mentioned before, I'm a big fan of paying the premium, letting someone else take care of this for me. I know that it's going to cost me a little bit more money, but at the end of the day, I'm saving that money because I'm getting my time back. I don't have to commit mental energy and time to resolving this issue. And I know that I can count on them. They're going to be more likely to do it right. They're less likely to make errors compared to me. And at the end of the day, this is going to save me down the line from potentially risking an audit because I messed up somewhere and I didn't realize it. It is worth paying the premium. I cannot stress this enough to most business owners. It is worth paying the premium if it is something that will save you time and energy down the line, because when you are saving your time and energy for things that are relevant, it will make you more money in the future. And this is something that I will continue to stress over and over again. And we will find instances where I would rather pay someone to have things taken care of for me just to be able to recuperate my time and energy back so I can focus on things that are important to me, that are things that I know I can handle, things that I need to tend to, as opposed to having to deal with all these side projects when they can easily be set up. So lawyer, account, have these people handy. Networking is something that you're going to want to do in this industry. This really, really goes for most industries as well, for most small business owners, for most retail operations. Having an idea of what is happening in this hobby to other people who are in a similar position as yourself, as an online retailer, as a retail store owner, is important. You want to be able to network. You want to have a network of people. At the very least, you should go to your local game stores. If you plan on opening up a brick and mortar, go to some other stores and take a page out of their book. Walk in. This is something I've considered. This is something I've done before. I've gone to plenty of game stores in Portland when I was considering opening up a brick and mortar this year. One of the things I went in and looked at stores was, what are they doing right? I walked in and I looked at everything. I looked at their shelves, looked at fixtures, looked at showcases, right? Looked at the layout, looked at the tables, the chairs, their register, how do they accept money, all these different things you can learn from someone else. Some stores may not necessarily be receptive to this, but there are no shortage of stores. Usually the better stores are more encouraging. They're more accommodating to people. We've had Rusty Hunt on here before, owner of NRG. He was very open and transparent about saying, hey, reach out to me if you need help, if you want to contact me, if you have any questions. He's more than happy to answer them. Same thing with Michael Caffrey. I've had him on here with an interview before. Same idea. He's more than happy to help just talk with stores. He has a Patreon that he uses where he has whereas money saving things for retailers. These are all tools that you have that most of the time are only learned through experience. It is one of the many tough pills to swallow in life, but there are people that have done this before who have failed before you, and they have the know-how and the means to help other people avoid making that same mistake. And that's why networking is so critical. Having kind of extended network of people you can talk to, bounce ideas from, buy from, sell to, these are all absolutely valuable. I think a big part of how I've gone to the spot where I am is because I feel like I have a very, very open network. I do talk to a lot of people. I do have a very wide range of store owners, of business owners, online, retail, that I've been able to talk to. I've been able to get ideas from. I've been able to have the luxury of going to a bunch of different game stores, looking and seeing, I like what they did here. This is a great idea. This is something that works. This is a component that looks nice. This is something that if I were to open a store in the future, I would take pages from. Even if you're an online store, consider the same thing. There is something you can learn from people whose entire career is built on buying and selling things online. There are things you can do almost assuredly to bring down the costs, right? There are ways to bring down the cost of your supplies, order in bulk. Maybe someone has a specific person they use. Maybe they know about a store on eBay that sells supplies. I know there are people that buy supplies directly on eBay in bulk. For a while, that was the cheapest. Uline is something where they sell to businesses. They have ways of getting supplies out there. Talk to people. I can assure you that there are there are tips and tricks and tools that some of these bigger retailers use that at the end of the day, you may not realize, but if you are able to talk with them and they can help you out and you can incorporate some of their ideas, it will be beneficial for your business in the long run. So with kind of all this out of the way, what have we done so far? We've taken the time to figure out working capital, figure out how much money we have to start the business with. We've done some of the basic preliminary tasks. We've registered our business, we've contacted a lawyer, we've contacted an account, we've started networking, we've looked at some of our stores in the area. Maybe right now we're just looking at a small online business. Okay, so now we need to start registering online, make sure we have our TC player up, we have our eBay store up. Now we can start selling. And this is where kind of the bread and butter of this comes in. Now we start selling, we need to start listing our cards. And now we can finally start getting our money back by selling some of these things that we've had laying around. And before I really go into that is ultimately going to be something that's another episode for another day. Doing the online component is something that is fairly in depth, it's fairly extensive, so I would rather save that. So I'll kind of wrap up today's episode with some of these closing thoughts. When you get started, be honest with yourself, look at your working capital, figure out, are you ready to do this? Because it is something that is a big commitment. A lot of people rush, and this is not something that you can rush. This is not something that can be done quickly. Establishing a business, trying to get a foothold in this is something that takes time. You're not going to see results overnight. You're not going to get paid overnight. You're not going to get rich overnight. This is something that is going to require a lot of work. It is going to require a lot of commitment from yourself. A lot of people who start with small businesses, they look for financial support from other people, either close friends, family members, etc. If this is something that you're looking to do yourself and you're going into this alone, all the weight is ultimately on your shoulders. You can't, if you don't really have anyone else that you want to rely on, you don't have a business partner, for example, all the weight is going to be on your shoulders. This is not something that you want to rush, that you want to get ahead of yourself, that you want to cut any corners on. Because at the end of the day, this is something that any corner that you cut, that will be something that will come back to bite you down the line. And this isn't something I can stress enough to people. When people are cutting corners, when people don't go in with enough working capital, they don't have enough cash flow to really keep themselves going, they don't value their time, they're not doing things properly, and they're trying to cut corners. These are all little things that you think may not necessarily be a big deal, but down the line, it's going to hurt you. And this is something that I can absolutely guarantee. When you are cutting costs, when you're cutting corners, when you're trying to do something because you think because you found a shortcut, I can assure you, I've fallen in this trap before. You are not as clever as you think you are. You are certainly not as smart as you think you are. You are very, very, very likely going to fall on a lot of the same failures that a lot of other small businesses and store owners have had to overcome before. And that's why I encourage networking. This is something where listening to someone else, they may be in a position to help you avoid making the same mistake that they've made in the past. And I know, just in the relatively short time I've done this, I've made my share of mistakes. I've definitely cut corners. I've definitely done things that as soon as it come back and hit me, I was able to immediately look back and think, this is what happened at the time. This is where I cut that corner. If I had just done it right the first time, I would save myself headache down the line. And with that, we'll kind of wrap up today's episode. Again, if there's anything I encourage you to do, have a plan. Make sure you have enough working capital. Do not cut corners. It is absolutely not worth it, and it will cost you more than just doing it right the first time. That's something I cannot stress enough. This is something that I will reiterate again and again and again to people. Mark, let's see, what's your comment? Always consider if your shortcut will scale from 10 orders to 100 orders to 1,000 orders. Absolutely. A lot of people, one of the fundamental parts of business is growth. A lot of things that businesses deal with are growing pains. one of the things that people do not do well enough is finding a solution that works right now for them may not be a solution that will work for them in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. When in the example that Mark uses here, he brings up a very good point. Shipping out 10 orders a day is very different than shipping out 100 orders a day, which is very different than shipping out 1,000 orders a day. For one person, 10 orders a day, feasible. 100 orders a day, going to be difficult. Doing 1,000 orders a day, if you do nothing else but ship 1,000 orders, then that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. At some point, when you grow, you're going to have to start thinking about these things. You're going to have to start thinking about employees. You're going to have to start thinking about how to arrange everything. These are things that I'll definitely cover in kind of a future episode, because again, all we're looking at today is if we assume that you as an individual are looking to make the transition as a hobbyist into a store owner, you're probably going to start off by yourself. Maybe you'll have one other person with you if they are your business partner, if there's an investor, a family member, a friend who wants to kind of help you get off the ground and kind of get the ball rolling. You're going to be on your own, and trying to figure out things on your own, very, very different than down the line when you have employees, when you have more issues, when these things that scale are going to become apparent, because it worked for you when you were by yourself, but as you start growing, you're going to start realizing that some of the things that you did may not work. The shortcut, this thing that you did when it worked because you were small, wasn't a problem until you became big. These are things to be aware of. So thank you, Mark. I do appreciate that. That is a very, very good, valid point that you bring in. And this is something that I'll definitely touch back on in the future. So with that, that'll be a wrap on today's episode. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Edwin13. You can find the social media sites for Vermilion on the right. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more. I'm not even sure what tomorrow's episode yet. I haven't written the outline. It'll likely be part 2 just to continue, and then I'll try and get some store owners to come in and reflect on some of the ideas that I presented here and give their own feedback. As always, thank you again for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Thanks.